Well, hi, everyone. My name is Beth Carlson Molina, and I am also on the lead team for Christians for Free Palestine. I am also a local pastor. I have a church called Open Way that is not far from here, just down Kingsway from here where we meet. And I want to quickly introduce Alexis for those who didn't come because she's the star of the show tonight. So Alexis is a member of the Jewish community here in Vancouver. She is one of the leaders of a community that meets in this space called, it's a liberatory Jewish chavura. I'm learning some words tonight, called Davening Liberation Oraciones. And she is also a member of the board for the Parrott Center for Secular Jewish Culture. On a personal level, Alexis has been someone who has encouraged me in my work and who has believed that I had something to contribute when I didn't believe that myself at times. So a true example of solidarity. And when I heard that she was going to be doing this solidarity work with the Center for Jewish Nonviolence in the region of Massafaryata, I was not surprised at all. That seemed entirely in character. And as I understand it, tonight is really part of that ongoing work because so much of what you were doing was bearing witness. And tonight you get to share that witness with us so that we can bear that with you and hopefully have our lives changed in a way that's somewhat parallel to the way your life has been changed. So it's a real honor to be invited to be your conversation partner tonight and your partner in this movement in general and to work within and across our faith communities. And speaking of faith communities, I welcome fellow Christians who have been here with us for Christians for Free Palestine events in the past. And I welcome our Jewish siblings, many of whom are here, who are part of Alexis's communities, people of other faiths, people who don't claim any faith. You're all welcome here. I want to just mention that a lot of the people who are here because they know Alexis through the Jewish community may fall on different places on sort of the political spectrum when it comes to what you believe are the causes for some of the realities we're talking about in the West Bank and what you think are the best ways forward. But wherever you are in processing those things, wherever you land, just know that any questions that are asked in good faith tonight will be entertained, even if the assumptions behind them are different than maybe the ones that Alexis and I are making, and that you're welcome here, even if you feel at times some tension with where others are at. We want to do that work of speaking across silos, or to use maybe a more Christian phrase, we don't want to just be preaching to the choir all the time. And I know for those who are Christians here, like me, if there are times when Alexis is specifically speaking to her Jewish community, let's not just tune out. I think, Christians are so intertwined in what's happening in the West Bank. And many of you know that there are even some Christian charities that are directly funding some of the settlements that Alexis is going to be talking about. And of course, as we talk about so often at Christians for a Free Palestine, as Christians, we have to reckon with our history of centuries of anti-Semitism that gave momentum to the Jewish nationalist movement in the first place. So my hope is that we can take a posture of listening and learning and partnering wherever we can with Jewish people who share our values for liberation and for a just peace. So just a quick idea of what our plan is for tonight. We're going to hand the floor over to Alexis to share some stories and some slides for about half an hour. And then I'm going to take about 20 minutes to ask Alexis some questions, including some of the ones that you have sent in. We'll take a quick break after that, about 10-minute break, and we'll come back with a chance for those of you who are here to put your hands up and ask some questions before we wrap up around 8 o'clock. That's the plan. Sound good? Okay, I think the floor is yours, Alexis. Tell us your stories.
Thank you so much, Beth, and thank you, Shadia. It's a real honor for me to be here at Trinity Grace United with this beautiful assembly of people. This is such a sacred space, and it is doing so much important work to bridge community, to bring in interfaith gatherings, particularly in the wake of the terrible events of October 7th. And everything that followed and everything that came before. Shadia and Anita and Beth and the beautiful team here are doing incredible work to support cultural exchange and collective learning. And that really enables all of us to center and uphold justice and solidarity with Palestinians and with all oppressed and marginalized peoples. So It's beautiful to be here, and thank you so much for this opportunity. As many of you know, I've recently returned from 3 months in the Masafariata region of the West Bank. Our small cohort of 13 people was called Hinenu, which translates in the Hebrew to Here I Am. And it was a program through the Center for Jewish Nonviolence. CJNV is made up of Israelis and of Jews in diaspora, and is led in collaboration with our Palestinian comrades in peaceful co-resistance against the occupation and apartheid. The intention of CJNV is to leverage Jewish identity through solidarity presence, accompaniment, and documenting human rights violations against Palestinians in the West Bank, including, but not limited to, forced expulsion, home demolitions, property destruction and seizures, military and settler violence, and arbitrary detention. Our work is grounded in collaboration with our Palestinian partners and in close relationship with the communities and families and activists that we live among and work with. And with your permission, I'd like to share some of my photos of my time in Masafriata, and then, as Beth said, we'll have a conversation. So, we'll begin in El Khair. El Khair is one of the 2 home bases for the Hinenu cohort in Masafriata. This village is home to some 700 Palestinians whose families fled there after being expelled from the Negev desert during the Nakba, or the Great Catastrophe of 1948. This is one of many Bedouin communities facing the imminent threat of forced expulsion to make way for expanding illegal settlements, and it's now nearly encircled by Carmel settlement, which today takes up some 60% of the land that was originally purchased by the Bedouins. And these are the lands surrounding El Khair, and you can see off in the distance the mountains of Jordan. And I'd like to share some of the street art in El Khair. This is the Samud kitchen, and Samud, for anyone who doesn't know, is an Arabic word that roughly translates to steadfastness. And it points to the values of maintaining dignity, cultural identity, and connection with the land, despite extreme adversity. This is a key principle in the nonviolent everyday resistance of Palestinians. And this structure that we're seeing, which is called the Samud kitchen, was built for the widow of Ada Hathaleen, who was shot and killed by a violent settler last summer. These rebuilt structures carry quotes from cherished Palestinian writers, such as Mahmoud Darwish and Hassan Kanafani, and social justice figures such as Malcolm X. And this is a tribute to Ada Hathaleen, who was a beloved teacher and activist. As I mentioned, he was murdered by a violent settler in July of last year, who walked away with no charges. Ada had been protesting the demolition of homes in El Khair to make way for illegal settlements. And the next slide is a piece of art that honors Ada's uncle, Haj Suleiman, who, like Ada, was killed while protesting the demolition of homes to make way for illegal settlements a couple of years earlier. Suleiman was run over by a bulldozer. This playground is currently, along with many other structures in El Khair, slated for demolition. And these Israeli flags can be found everywhere throughout the West Bank. This one is in Khair, but they are a constant reminder of the occupation. The other village in which so first, this is myself and another couple of Hinenus enjoying my very first taste of chicken maklaba, which if anyone here has had, it's amazing. And we are in the company of a wonderful Palestinian activist named Nasser Nawaja. Some of you may know he's also, he works with B'Tselem, Israel's human rights organization, as a researcher, a field researcher. And so in Tuwani, which is where I was based, I got to, so this is another piece of street art from a house in Tuwani. And like much of the street art in Palestine, this is a call to action, and it says, "Will you sit and watch?" This home where I was based was actually the guest quarters of the home of Bassel Adra, a Palestinian activist and filmmaker. Some of you may remember co-directed No Other Land. And this is some of the other art from Bassel's home. This figure of Handala, I don't know if everyone here is familiar. Handala has become something of an iconic symbol representing Palestinian freedom. He is a 10-year-old refugee child. He was created in 1969 by a Palestinian political cartoonist, Naji Al-Ali. And some may remember in last year, one of last year's Freedom Flotilla ships was actually named the Handala. Many of Palestinian families still retain the keys to their homes, and they retain them and display them prominently in their dwellings. And these keys here are in Bassel's family's home. This is an example of a cave home in Tuwani, of which there are many throughout the West Bank. Thanks to Shadia, who connected me with a colleague at the Bethlehem Bible College, I was able to arrange for a trip to Bethlehem on one of my weekends off. This vintage Visit Palestine poster from the 1930s has been reimagined to reflect the lived reality of the West Bank barrier, more succinctly known as the apartheid wall. And this is that reimagining. And this is the wall itself as seen from my room at Bethlehem Bible College. I also walked through Aida refugee camp, which began as a handful of tents and became a permanent fixture in 1950 to accommodate Palestinians who'd been forcibly expelled from 22 villages. As of 2023, Aida refugee camp held 7,000 residents and holds many examples of poignant protest art, such as this one. This idea of return is prevalent not only in refugee camps, but throughout the occupied territories. This iconic portal, the Key of Return, is also in Aida refugee camp and was actually crafted and erected by the refugee residents. Aida camp is the most tear-gassed neighborhood in the world. There is actually a shop in Aida refugee camp that takes the used tear gas canisters and creates art and beautiful jewelry from the used canisters. This is a memorial to a 13-year-old Palestinian boy, Abu Shadi, who was shot and killed in 2015 by an Israeli sniper. The army said it was a mistake. But my guide that day, Marwan, pointed out on a poster commemorating Abu's death where you can see the bullet holes where Israeli soldiers still shoot at his likeness. The apartheid wall was begun in 2002, currently stretches about 708 kilometers. About 15% of that runs along the so-called Green Line, which is the 1949 armistice line. The other 85% extends as much as 18 kilometers into the West Bank. It's right here, it's about 8 to 9 meters high and made of concrete, but in non-urban areas, it can be electrified fence or trenches or barbed wire. This wall features some really incredible protest art, including works by the UK street artist Banksy, such as this one. But a great deal of the art, in fact, most of it is by Palestinian artists themselves. And so many of them capture these themes of beauty and of freedom. These ones are from deep inside these next 4 are from deep inside the refugee camp. That one is based on a Banksy. And all speaking to this notion of liberation. There's a whole section of the wall that riffs on this idea that we were talking about, samud, this idea of steadfast resistance. There's a whole, like 500 meters that is simply different ideas of samud. What does samud mean to you? So just as a sample, you could read it as like a running poem. It was just extraordinary. So I just pulled 3 that I thought were especially beautiful. Some of my favorite moments in Masafriata happened in the many hours that we spent on pastoral accompaniment with Palestinian shepherds. And my colleague Sophie and I were out once in a tiny village called Shabel Botam once with Khalil and his 2 boys and his flock of goats and sheep. And after a few hours of shepherding, Khalil decided to sit down in the wadi under an olive tree and pull up a piece of limestone for a pillow. And after a while, a sheep came over and started nuzzling him. And then one of his boys came over to investigate, and soon it was just a whole pile up. Another family with whom we spent a great deal of time. Yes. Baby goats. In fact, baby sheep. This was a really incredible thing. I had the privilege of seeing a sheep being born, which is apparently really good luck, in addition to being super cool. So here you can see these tiny little, these little tiny yellow, these are the hoofs coming. And this is the mother as she begins to clean off her new lamb. And then as we were all watching this beautiful thing take place, we realized, there's still something happening at the other end. What's going on? So there was another little one coming. And so I got to see twins being delivered to their mama. And it was really just so beautiful to see the ease with which the shepherds facilitated this delivery and understood what was happening and were able to gently guide the mother to her little lambs and to wrap up the little ones in a sack because they realized it's too close to sunset. They're not quite going to be able to make it home and keep warm enough. That was a beautiful, beautiful day. Another family with whom we spent a great deal of time, this is Hajj Ali in a village called Harabat al-Nabi. And Hajj, this is his grandson, Muhammad. Muhammad and his younger brother, Walid, would take turns missing school in order to help their grandfather with the shepherding and to help their grandmother with household work and farm chores. This family experienced like a dizzying amount of attacks. Regularly, like clockwork, there were 3 at least settler attacks per day. And these would include everything from harassment, intimidation, physical assault, home invasions, property damage, and attempted animal theft. Haj Ali is 70 years old and suffers from cancer of the spine. And last week, I learned on Instagram that one night while he had been in the hospital, 5 settlers had come and stolen every single one of his flock, leaving the family with no means of subsistence. Another tactic that settlers are employing recently is to drop sick sheep into a healthy flock in order to poison them. In this particular instance, the police were called, and when the police came, they simply said to the Palestinians, "You can lodge a complaint," and then they ran over the dead sheep. This is a young Palestinian getting an early taste of farm work in Darit. In many of the villages, the women and children are part of the shepherding, and they will come out into the fields and work alongside the shepherds. Here are some children gathering brush to make a small fire to brew up some coffee or tea. One morning, we were called to this village on a rapid response where a regular settler named Moshe was grazing his sheep on Palestinian land. The landowner in the foreground, this is Hisham, greeted the settler, greeted Moshe, and then sent his young grandson down to offer Moshe some juice. And this is his grandson, still in pajamas. Nothing dreadful happens. He simply turns down the juice. And eventually Moshe left without further incident, which is not how things typically go. But when Hisham sent his grandson down, I turned to him and just raised my eyebrows, and he shrugged and smiled at me and said, "What else can I do?" Another couple with whom we spent a great deal of time was Abu Saddam and his wife. First, there's children being adorable, including the grandson in his little pajamas. This was just like about half an hour later before we were leaving. They wanted photos, as they always do, bless them. This is Abu Saddam, and he and his wife live in Susia, alone, an elderly couple. This is their front door, which is no longer functional because it has sustained so much damage from people beating on it that it does not open. So Abu Saddam and his wife were forced to cut a hole into the wall that will allow them access through their kitchen. This is now the only way that that elderly couple is able to enter and leave their home. On February 3rd, 25 masked settlers entered the village of Susia, and in a series of coordinated attacks, they set fire to 4 separate homes, multiple cars, vandalizing property, destroying a water tank, shattering windows, and breaking security cameras. Sometime later, I was called on a rapid response to the area with Dr. Amiel Vardi, a prominent Israeli human and civil rights activist. And he's been arrested hundreds of times over many decades doing protective presence in Masafariata. Amiel and I were quickly surrounded by 4 settler youths. These kids are usually somewhere in the neighborhood of 14 to 18 years old. So this is Amiel, the older gentleman. And they created a sort of a circle around us and were trying to trip us up and knock us down. So I'm filming with the camera on this hand, and then on the other hand, this is with my phone, I'm recording what's happening. I eventually messaged for help on the Signal platform, messaged for backup. Fortunately, it was not needed because a police car eventually rolled up, and this happens to be a closed military zone in Susia, which means that although we're not supposed to be there, they're not either. So they left. But then they continued on to the next piece of land, which is Abu Saddam's. And Amiel, the activist who I was with, said to me, I'm Israeli. I've been arrested any number of times, but I'm telling you, you can get in a lot of trouble being here. But I am not leaving. I will not leave these two. So together, Amiel and I went to Abu Saddam's home. And as we saw these 4 young people, I saw Abu Saddam come out of his home, seeing these youth approaching, and extend his hand to them. And they just stood there and looked at him. And then they just sort of lounged about in the yard for a little while, and then they simply turned around and left. They were checking out myself and Amiel, and again, we had the camera. But there were some occasions like this where you can feel that this idea that international presence actually does deter violence, it actually does keep it from happening. That is less and less the case. But this is one of those times when you could feel that, okay, it de-escalated to have people there witnessing. But the kind of courage that Abu Saddam showed in that moment was something that I experienced several times. This is another beautiful village we spent a great deal of time in, called Haraba. And this is the mother of that family, Rivka, showing my comrade Shell how to spin wool. Rivka had actually, I didn't realize this at the time, there had been a raid the night before on Haraba village, and Rivka had received a dose of tear gas and had to be treated for inhalation. This was hours later, the following morning, and I had no idea that had happened to her. Rivka would make meals for us every morning, including during Ramadan. When the rest of the family were fasting, she would not let us leave without having breakfasted. We used to joke about being held captive by enforced hospitality. It was amazing food, absolutely amazing. Every household in the West Bank, in Palestine, serves black tea and Arabic coffee. These are the 2 beverages you will find everywhere, and they are both amazing. The black tea varies from village to village and family to family, because each family has a particular herb that they like to add to it. So each taste, every time you get tea, it's a completely unique sensation. It may be sage, it may be mint, za'atar, or thyme. This is wild chamomile, and it is delicious. So we spent a great deal of time with Rivka and her 3 sons. This is myself having a bit of a stare down with Mordecai. Mordecai is the head of an outpost that straddles 2 villages, including Haraba. And it was Mordecai who had ordered the raid on Haraba. Once we were out shepherding, and I kept seeing these cactus leaves sort of lopped off and then stuck as if they were tombstones into the ground. And I asked Kusai, one of the shepherds, I was like, what is up with these? And he said, well, you see the little flag? And I hadn't noticed. So there's a little flag of Palestine etched onto the cactus, which is meant to represent RIP Palestine. And these have been left all over the grazing fields in the village of Haraba. And these are two of my friends from Karaba. Odai is about 19, Rivka's youngest son, and their neighbor Ismail. On Mordecai's orders, who is responsible for most of the detentions, assaults, raids, and property destruction that happened in that area, these men are being blindfolded and zip-tied, were forced to kneel for several hours and then detained for several more before eventually being released with no charge. These men holding them are not IDF, they are settler security. These are thugs that are paid by the Israeli government under the authority of violent settlers like Mordecai. And that day, the settler security forces were overheard complaining about the presence of activists and requesting that the army declare the village a closed military zone, saying that they couldn't get anything done with, quote, all the anarchists filming. This is me with Ismail after his release, and Ismail and Odai back in the fields. On another day, we responded to a call and found Mordecai and his youths interfering with a Palestinian well. Mordecai called in the army and tried to convince them to arrest myself and my colleague Itamar, which they ultimately didn't. But his minions returned days later to bathe in the Palestinian well, and then finally put locks on it to prevent them from accessing their water. In just the 4 days after Israel started its war on Iran, there were at least 50 documented instances of settler violence in the West Bank, including the coordinated pogroms in Susia. From January to March of 2026, 45 Palestinians were killed, 13 by settlers. This is, in the distance, an air raid siren. The air raid siren can be heard from the nearby settlement of Carmel. There are no sirens in West Bank villages. There are no bomb shelters in West Bank villages. The children of the neighborhood don't seem to have a whole lot of fear about the bombs. Whatever time of day they happen, the children will run out and try to trace the missile trails in the sky, or at night you can see the light of the rockets. They're entirely undaunted. There was some war material that fell from the sky. This fell near Susia. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but at least one Palestinian woman had been killed by falling shrapnel. And in the days following the war, most of the villages in the West Bank were closed. And that means no one can get out for school, for work, for hospital visits, nothing. Nothing in or out. And if there are villages that do not have those gates installed, the army and settlers will come and simply block the road with boulders. These leaflets were distributed in the days following the war and closed by saying anyone who attempts to harm Israelis or IDF forces will be subject to live fire and arrest. The settlers seemed quite emboldened by the war, although it's hard to tell now what it is that's emboldening them. It seems more sort of a general emboldenment. But this was an evening in El Khair where several settlers from Carmel drove through the village playing music as loud as they could that includes the lyrics, "Death to Arabs." In the neighboring village of Rojamalai, shepherding is a whole village affair. And the women and the children gather in the fields alongside the shepherds to harvest wild mustard, which will see their livestock through the winter months. And these are a few of the people that I met in my time there. This is Miriam, Ali Muhammad, and little Noor. We always had an amazing time when the children were there. One day at Rojamalai, there was a tense standoff that lasted several hours with Shimon, the head of a nearby outpost. He regularly roars through the fields on his ATV, harassing shepherds, stealing sheep, charging his vehicle at women and children. And on this occasion, when the army showed up, Shimon claimed that a Palestinian child had thrown a stone at a settler, and then demanded that the army conduct a raid on the entire village, which the army did. And Shimon was overheard to remark to one of the soldiers, "Do you want to put that gun to use? Let's go find that kid." There were several activists in the village that day, and we followed and documented the homes as they were entered. In the end, the mysterious child who had thrown the stone was not found. On another occasion in that same village, my colleague Noah and I had just sat down on a rock to a delicious lunch, including French fries. Who knew? Palestinians do French fries like nobody else in the world. You have never tasted a French fry, honestly, till you've tasted a Palestinian French fry. We had just had this beautiful lunch brought to us when we heard a disturbance across the wadi, and the women were waving it off, just saying, no, just stay and eat your lunch. And then we heard the bang of stun grenades. And so we stood up and grabbed our cameras, and across the wadi, we could see the army detaining Palestinians, and then just began throwing grenade after grenade after grenade until the whole valley was plumed with smoke. We were too far away to get closer in time. And shortly thereafter, you can see children again gathering brush to brew up some tea. And this was the field that day at sunset. One of the most exciting days in El Khair was when the whole village rolled out half a dozen strips of AstroTurf onto a cement plot adjoining the community center to make a soccer pitch. And the soccer pitch is called the Ada Hathaleen Memorial Field. It was absolutely amazing to see adults and children alike just working together to build this and luxuriating in just a safe place to crawl about or to play or to pray. This young man is Ada Hathaleen's youngest boy, Kenan, surveying his father's memorial field. This is Ejdia and Thala with one of our cohorts, Sam. And as they were sort of kicking the ball back and forth, Ejdia was goading Sam and saying, this was during Ramadan, and Ejdia was saying, "I am fasting. You're not fasting. You must stun me with your heart." The settlers in Carmel, instantly the pitch went in, erected State of Israel flags around the soccer pitch, and Regavim, which is the Israeli settler rights organization, took their objections to the Minister of Defense, Israel Katz, who has now issued a demolition order on this tiny field. In March, a settler car struck and hospitalized Ada's niece, 5-year-old Sawar Hathaleen, in a hit and run in front of the soccer pitch. No charges were laid. So this gentleman in the background, not the one driving away, this fellow, is the one who struck the little girl. So he got out of his car and is on the phone, presumably to the army, gets into his car and makes as if to leave. And the people you see around the car, Palestinians and activists, are shouting at him, "You was just struck a child, you can't just flee the scene." And this video, in which you can see no one has actually touched the car, but the settler would claim that there was damage inflicted on his vehicle that day. Might have been the 5-year-old child whose blood was on the pavement. But he claims that it was the activists, and on the strength of that claim, this young woman was deported, and 2 of my other comrades were banned from the West Bank. And this is the fellow, and this is my comrade, Litsi. I'm happy to report that Sawar had a full recovery, and here she is with her cousin Hamoudi. And there's a beautiful Israeli teacher who comes down to teach the kids and play instruments with them. So this is from a concert that they gave in February, and the lyrics of the song include the lines, "Al Khair is our home, joy of our eyes, your land smiles in our faces. Auda is a star in our night, his love is always with us." Since early April, the school children of Al Khair have been prevented from attending classes after settlers put up a razor wire fence on the path to their school. When the children sat along the fence in silent protest, complaints from nearby Carmel settlement yielded immediate results. The army quickly appeared and dispersed the children by hurling tear gas grenades at them. Rather than staying home, the children have gathered at the fence every day since, carrying signs that read, "Let us learn," and "Open the road." And now the entire village joins them, and these protests have been dubbed the Al Khair Freedom School. But meanwhile, the razor wire marks a new expansion of illegal settlements that will nearly complete the encirclement of the village of Al Khair. Palestinian activist Bassel Adra says, every week a family must decide, endure or leave your land. The hardest struggle is to stay on the land. Masafariata exists for one reason, people who hold on to life.
Wow. Thank you so much for your stories, for your videos. Can we give appreciation to Alexis for that? Okay, you ready for a couple questions?
Totally.
Okay. So I'm first wondering what were you prepared for? What did you expect, and what was surprising about what you experienced there?
I think I spent so much time not knowing what to expect that when I got to Masavriata, which is the region of the South Hebron Hills, the West Bank that we were in. Yatta is a city, and Masafriata are the lands around that city. When I got to that region, I was astonished to find that there is an extremely robust activist and solidarity movement in place, extremely well coordinated by our Palestinian leadership, and other organizations like ISM, the International Solidarity Movement. Operation Dove is another one that works there, an Italian organization, and an extraordinary raft of Israeli activists, many of whom have been doing this work for decades, many of whom go down on Shabbat, and have been doing so since the 1970s, because they feel that being that solidarity presence is the only way for them to Jewishly live their values.
Wow. I mean, on that note, I'm curious what motivated this for you, and is there a connection to your faith in this solidarity journey, and what made you want to say yes to go there and do that work?
Yeah, 100%. I had the extraordinary good fortune, and I'm still astonished that it happened, in 2017 to discover a shul here in Vancouver. Vancouver's only East Side shul, or Shalom. And I found myself inside one Shabbat morning in 2017 and never wanted to leave. And it was at Or Shalom that I learned of the values, the Jewish values of B'Tselem Elohim, the sacredness of, or actually each human life is created in the divine image. The value of B'Tselem Elohim, which is that above all other obligations, we are obliged to save a human life. And Tikkun Olam, which is repairing the world. And these three values, I could not but want to find some way to enact and embody after everything that happened on October 7th.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, speaking of October 7th, we hear a lot about the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem being these separate things. And I mean, that's by design, really separating Palestinians from one another very deliberately in this kind of apartheid system. But I'm wondering, were there connections, that you made between these different segments of Palestinian population, these different places, while you were based in the West Bank?
I spent no time at all in Gaza. I did spend a great deal of time in East Jerusalem. We had every other weekend off. So much of that time was spent in Jerusalem, and that city is absolutely transporting and so beautiful in its richness. I mean, it's absolutely soaked in the faiths of these three Abrahamic religions. It's an extraordinary place to visit, and it's also a very heart-wrenching place to be. It was difficult to be in East Jerusalem, particularly after the war on Iran broke out. They closed the Arab Quarter, and again, this was during Ramadan. And Palestinians could not access Al-Aqsa Mosque. They were not permitted in the city. All of the shops were closed. In terms of separation, I think what strikes me is that, yes, the idea is to separate Palestinians from one another so that it's that much more difficult to create a cohesion. And that is interrupted at every opportunity by checkpoints and by boundaries and by gates. And by different areas and geographical zones, you're not permitted to enter. You can't have a shop here. You may not drive here. But the separation also separates Israelis from Palestinians. And that's doing an awful lot of heavy lifting too. When it comes to manufacturing consent among Israelis, it's that much easier when they are not able, as they had been in decades past, to simply live side by side peaceably with their Arab neighbors, with their Palestinian neighbors.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I wrote this down. You and I chatted a little bit about your experience over coffee, and I remember coming up in our conversation this idea of apartheid and what you experienced there, and the difference between seeing people and situations motivated by fear and seeing people and situations motivated by love. And these two themes of fear and love, I think, come up in both of our religious contexts and both of our communities. I wonder if you could just riff a little bit on those themes of fear and love and what you witnessed there.
This is another place where I think of Jerusalem because particularly after the war started. So as I was saying, in the West Bank, there are I saw no weapons on any Palestinians. The only weapons that I saw in the West Bank were on settler militia, on the army, and on the police. In Jerusalem, everyone is armed. Everyone is armed. And there is, there's the Iron Dome, there are the bomb shelters, there are the sirens that go off constantly and people seeking shelter as well. They should, of course. There's a siren, but there's such a strange difference to experience that and to I guess to see like a young father with a stroller going down the street with an assault rifle, just as a matter of course. He's not in uniform, but there will be, it's like an ever-present handgun or an assault rifle. And that was a huge, I was not prepared for that. But what really struck me also was that in the West Bank, where none of that obtains, the fear does not, like in Jerusalem, it's kind of like you can cut it with a knife. It's sort of just this rigidity and this tension in West Jerusalem. And in Masafariata, every single moment that was not filled with settler events was simply like all of the beauty in between those moments was what struck me the most. And that in those moments, there was not the fear. There wasn't even the fear of, how do we, they're going to be back and what do we do it's simply, you get on with what you were doing before they came. And then it's almost like like you simply refuse to live in fear. Or you can't afford to, or there's no time to. Yeah. But as to love, Beth, and this is the beauty of your question, it's that flip side. It's the other side of fear. And I don't know how easy it is as a choice. Can you simply just decide, I don't want to live in fear. I'm going to just lean into love. But I feel like if you are able to set up your life in such a way that what is centered is not your own safety and the preservation of what you have, which is just impossible to do in any kind of reality. And it can only lead, I think, to that sort of tension and rigidity. So I really took the example of that as something that I would love to try to lean in a little bit more myself and just hold on a little less tightly to things that are absolutely out of my control and that only make me more and more centered about myself rather than how can I help my community.
Yeah, I mean, that really speaks to solidarity and protective presence. I mean, you're putting yourself, your body in harm's way and choosing that attitude and that posture of love in the midst of really risky things. And I mean, I felt, even watching some of those clips, I felt my blood pressure rising. And I know that I have a fear of even conflict, let alone some of the violent things that you're talking about. And it gets me thinking a bit about, the fact that even sometimes as communities of faith, we try to avoid conflict, or we say that we're not political, or, we try to sort of bracket things to the side to sort of keep the peace. And I mean, having experienced what you did, you kind of hinted at this already, but what would you challenge people like me, other people in their communities of faith, in their families, if there's conversations like this happening, what would you say to us?
I mean, I don't know how much I'm in the majority or minority on this. The idea of keeping politics separate from faith makes no sense to me at all. And what on earth is the point of gathering in a community with shared values if I only share them with the people who are just like me? Like, where does that have the opportunity to grow itself or to in fact change? So in terms of advice, I mean, I'd be loath to give it other than to say that, yeah, for me personally, I am not able to separate. And
Yeah. To lean into that.
I suppose, I mean, it's one of those moments, I mean, it's one of those ways in which friction can hopefully be generative. But I don't see the point in having values that we abide by in our spiritual lives that we're like, well, no, I'm not going to take that outside of these four walls. I'm not going to examine what that means. I mean, we're part of a larger society, right? So it's wonderful that it works in this little microcosm where we all pray together and we all, like, it's just, if it doesn't work outside of those walls, what are we doing? It's like a social club. Like, let's make this make sense where things don't make sense.
Well said. Yeah. Just one or two more questions before we take a break here. Do you recommend that other people do what you did? And if so, what caveats would you give? What responsibilities as people of faith do you think we have to folks in the West Bank and beyond?
I think we have a responsibility as people of faith, as human beings, as taxpayers. I think we have a responsibility to try to enlarge our compassion in whatever way we can. It doesn't have to be in Palestine. Palestine happens to be something that's very special to me. There are terrible things happening in every part of the world right now that desperately need attention and that desperately need fixing. This is something that's very dear to me. I absolutely recommend everyone go. It can be physically grueling. There are several organizations that I think Shadia will be sending around some resources for us tomorrow. Some organizations that have everything from like a more immersive experience. You can go during olive harvest. You can go for a shepherding accompaniment, and times will vary anywhere from 3 months to a couple of weeks to 10 days to you can choose your own time. I guess in terms of and some of those are faith-based and some of those are completely not faith-based. I guess a caveat would be just knowing your own physical limitations. It can be strenuous. It can be strenuous physically and it can be emotionally demanding. I was very fortunate to have a wonderful cohort of folks to talk to. There were very good mechanisms in place that we could speak to people in mental health. And if you're fortunate enough to have a beautiful supportive community at home, as I did and do, that's a wonderful support to have too. I guess I would just say to know your own limitations. And also, all of these organizations are wildly happy to entertain questions about what it would be like, or should I do this, or what are the limitations or restrictions. So absolutely get in touch with these places if you're at all interested.
That's great. And just finally, what sticks with you now that you've been back, for a few months or a couple months at least? What resonates and returns to you from this experience?
The way the clouds moved over the land. I think before I went to Masafariata, I had some sense of what was happening there. We all have social media. We're all seeing what is happening. So I had sort of braced myself for that. And while it was terrible, many times it was terrible to be there, I wasn't, in a sense, surprised by that. But I think what I realize now, having returned from there, is that what I gained was a sense of not just what we're up against, but what we're fighting for. what we want, what we want to see, what life can be, what community can be, what solidarity can be, what justice can be, what it could feel like, what it could look like, that I did not have prior to going. And I think that the kind of work that we are up against in terms of authoritarianism, militarism, nationalism, racism, fascism, it's a lot to be up against. And if we lose sight of what it is that we want our future to look like, I don't think we're going to have the juice to do it. So wherever you're from, wherever you're positioned in the world, whether you go to Gaza, whether you go to the Sudan, whether you go to DRC or Dominican Republic or Haiti or Colombia, you can do solidarity work from wherever you are. When I was on the phone with on Zoom with the executive director, Daniel Roth of CJNV, you sort of have a one-on-one before you go. And he was asking why I wanted to go. And I said, everything I'm doing here just sort of feels theoretical and it's in my head. And I need to actually be on the ground and feel like I'm doing something with my physical self, to be present. And he said, that's really true, and you will absolutely get that. And you will also feel like, in some moments, so overwhelmed. And you will say to yourself, all I'm doing is putting out fires. If I could just get some distance, I could really do the hard work of influencing policy and writing to my MP. And when I'm away from here, then the point is there's stuff to do everywhere. Right. Absolutely everywhere.
Well said. Wow. Thank you. Let's take a break. Let's take 10 minutes, get some air, get some tea and coffee. We'll come back just for 15, 20 minutes at the end. Do you have some other things you want to leave us with just as we're closing here?
I do. Thank you, Beth. I want to just leave us with a couple of thoughts, if you'll indulge me for 2 more minutes. The Palestinian Canadian Saeed Tibi writes, "The only true way to honor the dead is to work for futures that would have saved them." There are many important petitions that we can sign, many worthy organizations doing important justice work in Israel, Palestine that we can and we should donate to, and everyone will receive a list of resources and suggestions in your inbox. But I also really want to uplift the importance, to your point, Avril, of questioning, of talking about, and just as importantly, of thinking about the narratives that persist in our communities and in our families and within ourselves. And do not let the words Palestine, occupation, genocide, and apartheid become taboo. Do not let them become off limits. In 2019, Rabbi Hannah Dresner, a former rabbi at Or Shalom, asked this of her congregation: do we really need to control the word genocide? Isn't it our moral legacy to perceive the similarities of unthinkable oppressions? All of us joining in an activism motivated by understanding the soul of fellow sufferers? I think that whether we are spiritually or ritually observant, or proudly atheistic and agnostic, whether we are committed secularists or deeply humanists, we can invite ourselves to ask, does this framing of this or that issue enlarge my compassion, or does it constrict it? Does it ask me to rely more heavily on structures of militarism and oppression of the other? Does it rob me of agency, either my own or that of my own community to which I belong? Does this idea narrow my circle of trust or my idea of who is worthy of compassion or human dignity? If we remain silent while calls for equality and justice are misread as a threat to Jewish safety, We allow the preciousness of human life to be co-opted for nationalism, triumphalism, and a colonial project whose actions right now are centered on the expulsion, elimination, and erasure of the Palestinian people. Let us be accountable to each other and build relationships rooted in co-resistance and mutual flourishing. Let us disrupt and dismantle the systems that uphold occupation and oppression and apartheid from Turtle Island to Palestine. Let us be people who insist on life. As a friend of mine once said, who is here tonight, there is joy and a whole world to be won.
Preach. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Alexis, for your eloquence, for, again, like Omri said, your accessibility and how you've presented this, and for your heart that you shared with us. Thank you for modeling the best of what I know of the prophetic teaching and work of bringing testimony, of bringing a powerful voice, and not only telling us what you saw, but what it meant to you. It's powerful, and I hope there's more places that will host you to share these stories.
I am available. Thank you so much, Beth.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks for braving the heat of the space.
Thank you, Shadia. Thank you, Anita.
We'll see you next time, hopefully. Thanks again.